Hi, folks. We are in Daniel chapter 11. We are actually in the end of Daniel chapter 11. This is probably the most difficult chapter of the Bible to teach. Now, I say that not because I've taught every passage in the scripture, but just because this one is one that is future and or this portion of we're in the end of it, this portion of the chapters in future. At least I place it in future. There are some that place it as totally past, all of chapter 11. Some place it as totally future, the whole chapter. I place the part up through verse 35 as past, and picking it up at chapter or at verse 36 as future. Now, that is consistent with the way that we have been teaching the book of Daniel. We saw that Daniel chapter 2 started out with a vision, that is, it was actually a dream, and it ended with future. And we will review that here in just a minute. But let me just remind you of what it is that we are dealing with. We actually taught chapter 10 a few weeks ago, and chapter 10 was an introductory chapter to introduce chapters 11 and 12. And so in verse 14, it says, "Now I am come," this is the angel had come, "now I am come to make thee," that is Daniel, "to make thee understand what shall befall thy people," that is the Jews. "Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in latter days." Latter days. Now that's the reason that I am presenting this as being a future time. And I'll show you again further as to why I've divided this. But now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. Now, this was given to Daniel approximately 500 BC. And so anything beyond that is latter to him. But as we have studied through the chapters, we've seen much of what Daniel saw in his vision has already been accomplished. Now, just to review a little bit more of what we've studied, I believe that each of the prophetic chapters is telling the same story, just giving a little different or more detail than some of the previous ones. In chapter 2, we saw the king's dream, King Nebuchadnezzar of Medo-Persia. I don't know why God gave a heathen king a dream that told him of the future, but Daniel interpreted that dream. And we've got the picture of the dream here, where Daniel interpreted that there were going to be four kingdoms that would rule over Israel. And those four kingdoms were Babylon first. That was the king that had received the dream. But he told him that after him would be another kingdom. That was Medo-Persia. Following Medo-Persia would be Greece, and following Greece would be Rome. And then beyond that, going down all the way to the 10 toes of this particular statue. Following the 10 toes, we had a rock cut out without hands from the mountain, and it smashed the image in the feet, which destroyed the entire image. All of it was like the chaff of summer threshing floors. and just blew away. Anyway, that we know to be future. Now, I say that there's some that are trying to say that it's not future, but I'm sorry, I have not found any way to conclude differently. Then in chapter 7, this was Daniel's first vision. Now, it came the first year of the king of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. He was king for 14 years. This came the first year of that kingdom, and it gave the same four beasts that, well, not the same four beasts, but it gave the same four empires, showing them as beasts instead of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. We first saw the lion. The lion was representing Babylon. Then the bear representing Medo-Persia. The four-headed leopard that represented the Greek Empire. And the final one was the Roman Empire, which was represented by a beast that just says was terrible. He couldn't describe it. So don't accept my drawing as being very representative. But it wound up that that beast had 10 horns, like the 10 toes. 3 of those horns were plucked up, and a little horn replaced those 3. And he is the little horn that I believe is of the future, the Antichrist. Then chapter 8. In chapter 8, this was the second vision of Daniel, and it came the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. Still a number of years to go before the Babylonian Empire ended. But we saw 2 beasts here. We saw, first of all, a ram that had 2 horns. Those 2 horns represented the kingdoms of the Medes and the Persians, and one horn was higher than the other, representing the fact that the Persians would be the dominant ruler of that empire. They were overrun by a single horn goat that came and ran into the ram. The single horn was broken off, and 4 horns came up in its place, which we saw as representing the 4 generals of the first king that took over and divided the land. Then in chapter 9, Daniel was praying in chapter 9, the first part of the chapter, because he was reading his Bible. Imagine that, a prophet reading his Bible. Anyway, he was reading his Bible, and he found in the book of Jeremiah lived the same time Daniel did, but Daniel got his writings, and Jeremiah was a recognized prophet, and Daniel saw in his prophecy that the nation of Israel was to be in captivity for 70 years and then be returned. Well, that 70 years was about up, and Daniel was concerned because he looked around and he saw that his people really had not repented of their sin and turned wholeheartedly to God. So he was very concerned, and God sent Gabriel, the angel, to Daniel to say, Daniel, the 70 is not the important number. He didn't say it exactly that way, but he said the thing that's going to happen is that there are going to be 70 times 7, or 490 years that are going to be determined upon the Jews. He said upon thy people, which is all of Israel, if you consider the Jews to be a limiting factor. But 490 years are going to be determined upon the Jews. Now, some consider that those 490 years were absolutely consistent. I see that he described 69 of those groups of 7 years, or 483 years, were determined upon the Jews from the time of the command that we have in the book of Nehemiah. From the time of that command, 483 years are determined upon the Jews until Messiah comes and is cut off. He's cut off, but not for himself. He's cut off for us. Anyway, that was the vision of Daniel chapter 9. Then we got into chapter 11, and whoa, if that chapter isn't a chapter. He gave us details that you just can't imagine. If you can't figure that God is all-knowing, you just read Daniel chapter 11, read Daniel chapter 11, and you look in the history books, and you will find all of these little details that Daniel is told. Now that comes down as history until we get to verse 36. Now, verse 36 starts to give us some future information. With that, what we're going to be studying in our, as an outline in our study today, is about the Antichrist, the future Antichrist. We're going to see his religious persuasion, his religious practice, and his secular activities. So those are the things that we're going to be seeing as we study today. Now, I know I've told the story before, but I'm going to have to tell it again because it's so fitting for the chapter that we're studying, or the section of the chapter that we're studying today. In the church where I was saved, we had a prophecy conference every year. Now, at that prophecy conference, there would be men, scholars, come and present various sections of prophecy. Now, these gentlemen would go from church to church in the area and present the prophecy subject that they were assigned. Each of them were assigned a portion of the prophecy to present. And they would go from church to church presenting that. Well, one night we had a gentleman preaching on the tribulation time to come. Now, he was going through, and the sanctuary was full, so full that the pastor, instead of doing what he might have done with having a guest speaker, he didn't go down and sit in the audience. He had to stay on the platform in one of the chairs that were on the platform. So he was kind of sitting behind the speaker, and the speaker was presenting the tribulation to come. Well, this was the first time I had ever heard that kind of stuff. The first time I was newly saved. And so I had not grown very much, but he was telling us about the 7 years to come. He got going with it and was telling about some of the events during that 70 years. And all of a sudden, there was a shout from the audience. I didn't understand what the shout was all about. I just, heard, and there was a disturbance as far as I was concerned. The speaker stopped momentarily. The preacher sat up high on his chair and was looking out into the audience, trying to see who is this that's making this disturbance. What is this all about? Well, it got quiet, and the speaker continued with his presentation. The pastor finally settled back in his chair. I don't think he spotted who it was that had disturbed the presentation. He just continued. Well, the speaker got on further into his presentation, and again, a shout out of the audience. And the pastor was up on the edge of his chair looking out. Who is this? Where is that coming from? Well, it settled down again, and the speaker continued with his presentation. He got close to the end, and again, a shout came from the audience, and I understood it this time. The guy shouted, "Scare tactics!" Well, I tell you, if you don't know you're saved, listening to the um, presentation about that 7 years to come, it could be scare tactics, real scare tactics. Well, as it turned out, this was a man that had uh, walked the aisle to get saved just a few weeks before. But he had come to church that night. This conference was several nights in a row. I forget whether it was 5 or 7 nights in a row, but anyway, it was quite a few nights in a row. And he had come that night, and he was polluted with alcohol. Man, if you hear the things about what's going to happen during the 7 years, and you know you're polluted, it could be quite scary. Well, anyway, with that, uh, I need to just say before we go into our study, if you don't know you're saved tonight, if you're not sure of your salvation and where you're going to be when the Lord returns, this is a good time to get that straightened out. Right now, even before we get into our study, you confess Jesus as your Lord. And we'll hit that again as we get deeper into our study. But I want to make sure that you understand this is a thing that is determined upon the Jews, upon Israel, not the church. This is what is determined upon Israel. So, the thing that we're going to do as we get on through this, we're going to connect some of these things with the New Testament. Some of the New Testament tells us about these same things, particularly if you get into the book of Mark, the book of Matthew, the book of Revelation. Most of the book of Revelation is about this time. And also is presented in Luke, and it's presented many other places in the scripture. But let's go ahead and get started. We are in Daniel chapter 11, and I'm going to do something I've done before, but I normally hate to admit it. I'm going to cheat just a little bit. We're going to skip ahead because I'm defining this as being a future time. I want to tell you just a little bit about why I'm defining it as future time. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. We're starting in verse 36, but Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40 says, this is, and at the time of the end shall, and we'll get the rest of the verse when we get to that point. But this is at the time of the end. We're not at the end yet. Then chapter 12, we just move right on in from chapter 11 to chapter 12, and we'll be looking at chapter 12 in our next study. But says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, that is Israel, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people, Israel, shall be delivered, every one that is found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, I want you to think with me about when this happens. This we find in the book of Revelation in chapter 20. This is for the Jews, not for the church, for the Jews. They will be judged, and at that time, many will be going into everlasting contempt, and some will be in um, the everlasting life. But I want you to remember that 69 weeks had passed. 69 weeks passed until Jesus came. Now, that 70th week has not happened yet. That happens at the time of the end. That happens later. In the New Testament, well, we're going to, excuse me, I was about to skip something here. We're going to go ahead and start with our study here in chapter 11, going to verse 36. It says, "And the king shall do according to his will." We're dealing with the religious persuasion of the Antichrist. And the king, that is the Antichrist, and I know I'm making kind of a jump there, but I will indicate why as we go on through this study. "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all." Now, this could be speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes, partly. But Antiochus Epiphanes, remember, was defeated by the Maccabee family. So he didn't prosper too well in relation to the Jews, at least not after a period of time. He actually was overrun. So, again, we find some things in the New Testament relative to this. We have Jesus speaking, and he says, this is, again, Jesus in Mark chapter 13 and verse 2, says, "Seest thou these great buildings," looking at the temple, "seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, let me just comment on this real quickly, because I have heard some pastors lately complaining about the wall that is there in Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall. That Wailing Wall was not part of the temple. Now, I'll just say that, and we'll go on from there. The stones that were part of the temple, not one of them stands upon another. They were all thrown down, and the gold scraped off. You know the way they got those things down? It's interesting. God had told about that. I mean, Jesus told about it right here. And the way they did that is the temple was covered with gold. Gold had run between some of the stones of the temple. Well, they were not going to leave a bit of that gold left. And so when Titus, the Roman general that burned the place down, when he did that, he burned it down, and they took stone upon stone, and they scraped all of the gold off of it, so that they would have it all. And that's the reason every one of those stones were thrown down. Then we go to a little further there in Mark 13 to verse 14. Says, "But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet," oh my, this is relating right back to exactly what we're talking about. It says, "But when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet." Now, Daniel the prophet was there 500 BC. Jesus is there, and this is in the 30 BC area. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, future, 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 when you see it standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, we have a parallel passage in Matthew where he talks about this, but the word standing there is an interesting word. Standing where it ought not. Now, the word standing means to stand or to abide. It is not the word that means to tear down. The thing that happened when the Romans went in, they burned the temple down and they took stone off of stone. It's got to be a future place. It's standing where it ought not. Now, in Matthew, he uses the word standing, and we assume that it's standing in the temple, and we assume that, not just total assumption. Look with me at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4. Who opposeth and exalteth himself, now this is talking about the Antichrist to come, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped. This Antichrist is, we're talking about his religious persuasion here, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now we're connecting this with the abomination of desolation. It doesn't use those words there, but I believe it's a good, legitimate connection. The ones that claim that the temple being destroyed, which happened in 70 AD, also claim that the 70th week followed immediately after the 69th week, so that Jesus died during the 70th week. But 70 AD, Jesus died at approximately 33 AD. 70 AD is not 7 years, not the 70th week. It's not 7 years after the 69 completed. So that just doesn't fit. It's sometime future. Now, we don't want to be too dogmatic when we're talking future, because when people get too dogmatic, they get wrong. But anyway, what we see here is that there is going to be something that's going to be placed in the temple. And it says here that it's going to be the Antichrist himself that's going to set himself up as God. Back to verse 36. It says, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. That's what we read in 2 Thessalonians. Magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things. That's a good word there too. Speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined, that's hard for me to read. For that is determined shall be done. Now, again, Antiochus Epiphanes was defeated by the Maccabees. He was driven out of the land, and for about 100 years, the Jews were able to at least not have any foreign domination there. They weren't at peace, but at least they didn't have foreigners dominating them. Now, he's going to speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Now, this word marvelous is a word that's used in Egypt about God speaking things relative to Pharaoh and speaking miracles that he was going to accomplish against Pharaoh. So this guy is going to speak miraculous things against the God of gods. He's going to look like he is a god. People are going to worship him. That's why he's going to set himself up in the temple. This is future. It's not Antiochus Epiphanes in verse 36. Now, I believe that this is the little horn of chapter 7 of Daniel. I believe it's the little horn of chapter 8 of Daniel. Now, the little horn of chapter 7 came from the Roman Empire. The little horn of chapter 8 came from the Greek Empire. But remember, the entire Greek Empire was part of the Roman Empire. So, I don't know exactly how these things are going to work out in the future, but I believe that they are the same little horn. And this is going to happen, and it's going to be there until that is determined shall be done. And the thing that's determined that shall be done is we're going to see the stone that is cut out without hands from chapter 2 come and crush the image such that we have the 1,000 years of Christ set up and going from that time. Then, verse 37, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. He's not going to regard the God of his fathers. Now, many interpreters interpret this statement to mean that the Antichrist is going to be a Jew. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything further on that, but that's what some say. Still, what he's saying here is neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God. He shall magnify himself above all. This guy is going to be an atheist. So his religious persuasion is that of being an atheist. I am who I am. His religious practice, verse 38, says, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and the God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. This guy, it says, in his estate. Now, that word estate is an interesting word. It can mean his office or his position, but it's the same word that is used for the base of the base of the laver there in the temple. Excuse me, I forgot what we called it. The base of the laver there in the temple, the thing that the actual laver sat upon. So the estate may be what he sets himself on, that is, whatever God he's calling people to worship, and that being himself, the abomination of desolation. That would be what he's setting the abomination of desolation on. So in his thing that he sets up there, he shall honor the God of forces. Now, I'm not sure totally what that means, but let's remind ourselves of our key verse. He, that is the one and only God, our God, He removeth kings and setteth up kings. Our God is going to set this king up. He's not going to recognize him. He's going to believe himself to be God. But our God is going to set this guy up. The little horns messing around with God. He honors and he worships himself. Now it says that he is, verse 39 here says, thus shall he do in the most strongholds. He's going to set up and worship forces. Now, Herod the Great, who came before Jesus, Herod the Great built a place called Masada. This is in southern Israel. It's a place up on a plateau, and this is a picture of it that we've got here. It's up on a plateau. He built a town up there, a town where he could live and be protected. This has a wall around it, and it is a place where, if you recall reading in the New Testament about the Zealots, these were guys that would go in and would individually fight the Romans. They would carry a knife under their robe, and when a Roman soldier was alone, he got it. Or if one of the Jewish leaders were speaking friendly to one of these Roman soldiers, he got it. These zealots used this Masada as their headquarters, and the Romans had great difficulty getting there to stop these zealots from their attack. Then let's go on with the rest of verse 39 here. It says, thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God. That's kind of weird. Whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. He's going to rule over many. He's going to cause others to rule over many, and he's going to divide the land for gain. This is going to be a corrupt politician. We don't have those in our nation, do we? All right. He's going to he's going to cause them to worship other gods. I want you to stop and evaluate. What God do you worship? This guy worshiped himself. He did his own will. He did whatever he thought that became his priority. Whatever he thought was top notch. When people see me, I want to know, what do they think of? Do they think I'm just some religious nut? Or am I somebody that's promoting myself? I don't want to be promoting myself. I want to be promoting God. Do I speak marvelous things that make people think I'm something good? I hope not. I hope I speak marvelous things about the God of gods, that is, the God that is God. This guy is going to honor himself. Who do I honor? Who do I build up with my position? I'm doing some self-evaluation as I go through this. What about my money? What about the things that I possess? Do I use those to honor God? I want you to evaluate yourself also there. But let's go on with this guy's secular activities. Verse 40 says, and at the time of the end, again, this is what we presented earlier, and the reason I believe that this is still future. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Now, the king of the south is probably the leader of Egypt. Now, the king of the south shall push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Now, I am not sure that I understand this verse correctly, but it sounds like the king that we're talking about is not the king of the north. It's going to come against him. There, sorry, I got two errors here, but there's the him that it's presenting, and I believe that's the Antichrist. And the king of the south is going to come against him, and the king of the north is going to come against him, and they're going to come with a mighty army. It says that they shall pass over. This hints to, that is the time of the end, hints to the time of the 10 toes, the 10 kings, and maybe the 3 horns that were plucked up. Maybe that's all involved in this particular verse here. But reading the verse again says, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Now, just to add a little to that, the little horn maybe relates to Greece, maybe relates to Syria, Iran. It can't be sure here, but some believe that the king of the north that's speaking of here is actually Russia. Now, again, I can't push that. I'm just saying that's what many believe. So then, verse 41. He shall enter also into the glorious land. Now, the glorious land is Israel. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries, and shall overthrow, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Now, I don't know why the Lord would have those to be excluded. But again, I believe we're talking about the tribulation time here. In Matthew chapter 24, we hinted at this as we were reading from the book of Mark. This is the parallel passage in Matthew. It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in, not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, that is, the stone cut out without hand actually take over. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, he's talking about the Jews here, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. We're dealing in Judea here. We're not dealing with the church in Matthew 24. We're not dealing with the church in Mark 13 or the parallel passage in Luke. We're dealing with the Jews. This says that there's going to be such a horrible time coming. It says there shall be great tribulation. Now, this is not stating the great tribulation as most people try to present it. It says, then shall be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world. That's saying there's going to be a pretty rough time going on in Judah. And it says that they should run to the mountains. Now, many people interpret that as the possibility that they should run to Petra. This is a city, marvelous place, that was built by some people and is built in stone. It was abandoned in about 300 BC, excuse me, because of an earthquake which destroyed about half of the city. But there are houses sitting here empty. They're visited by tourists, usually riding on camels to get there. But this is a city in Edom, which is not going to be conquered by this Antichrist to come. It's a possibility. I'm not saying that's where they're going to go. I wouldn't dare tell anybody if it was, because then they'd go bomb it or something. But let's go back to verse 41. These of Daniel 11, these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, that's where Petra is, and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. So anyway, that may be the mountains to which these people go. Then verse 42 and 43. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and upon the land of and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Remember who started this ruckus? Egypt started it. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. The Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Now, here's a map. I hope you can see this map. And you have to excuse me having two arrows here. I'll try to get one of them a little bit out of the way. But here is Israel, this little bitty stretch of land right here. That's the precious land. Right here with the bigger arrow. Here is Egypt. Here is Libya. Here is Ethiopia. Now, Egypt used to be down further, and Ethiopia used to be right there at Egypt. And so somehow this little horn, and I believe that the little horn is probably from this area here, around Iraq, Syria. Remember, this was the division of the Greek Empire It was the division that Antiochus Epiphanes was part of. Anyway, this area here is a fairly big area. Egypt is a fairly big area, little bitty land of Israel. God has determined marvelous things relative to Israel. Marvelous things. Anyway, going back here, just remembering that in verse 43 it says, "And the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps." Now he's ready to take those over, but the Libyans and Ethiopians were at his step, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Now let me show you another map here. Again, many believe that the north is talking about Russia. The east is talking about China. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that many believe that. And we want to go and look at the book of Revelation and see if we can determine a little bit about that, because the book of Revelation covers this same period of time that we're talking about here. So we're going to go to Revelation chapter 9. It says, "And the sixth angel," this is during the trumpet judgments. There are various judgments during the tribulation time. It starts with the seal judgments. They're bad, but they're not as bad as the trumpet judgments. Then the trumpet judgments go away, and that's introduced the vial judgments, which are even worse than the trumpet judgments. It says, "And the sixth angel sounded," that's here, he's sounding his trumpet, "and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to this sixth angel, which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year to slay a third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen," that's a lot of men, "the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000 thousands, and I heard the number of them." Now, going on, it says, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and heads of the horses were as the head." Excuse me, I should have gotten me some water. My throat's dry. And the heads of the horses were as heads of lions. What a horse! And out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. Now, I think this is talking about some of our more modern military apparatus. John didn't have the knowledge to describe them very well. It says, verse 18, by these three was a third part of men killed by the fire and by smoke and by brimstone. Think about the ones that are wanting our environment straightened out, the environmentalists. And by verse 18, and by these three was a third part of men killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. again, I think those were some of our more modern military weapons. For their power is in their mouth, and their tails, probably a machine gun, and their tails, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, that is, they could bite, and their heads, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Going to chapter 16 of the book of Revelation, and we're going to come back and pick just a few things out of the verses that we've already mentioned. But verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 12 says, "And the sixth angel poured out his vial." Now, this is the vial judgments, came after the trumpet judgments. "And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared." Now remember, let me back up to the verses just before it. It says here that 200,000 with the number of the soldiers that we have here. 200,000 thousands, that's 200 million. China has boasted of having an army that size for quite a few years now. Remember the East. I'm going back up to our map. Remember the East. Maybe China. This guy was in Egypt, ready to go to Libya and ready to go to Ethiopia, and signs out of the East and out of the North. I don't know, I'm not promising that these are the ones that are coming, but these were scaring him, so he turned around. All right, let's go back. Verse 44 and 45, end of the chapter, secular activities. It says, "But the tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore shall he go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain," probably Jerusalem. Between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem, is where he's going to have his headquarters. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. This is the Antichrist to come. He is going to be in the land of Israel and is going to be destroyed. Now, that brings us to our conclusion. We looked at the Antichrist religious persuasion. He will be an atheist. He'll honor no one but himself. Who's your God? This guy had no book, no instructions. His playbook was whatever he thought of. And I ask you, who is your God? Does your God have a book? Does that book mean what it says? Does that book have authority in your life? Many call themselves Christians today. They say they believe in the book, but they don't believe it has any authority over their lives, over their daily activities. It's not the playbook for their life. Many churches don't consider the Scripture to be of authority. Many large church denominations publicly proclaim that the Bible is not their authority. Now, they don't say it quite that way, but they say particular passages in the Scripture are not their authority. Then the Antichrist religious practice. He will do according to his will. Whose will do you follow? Whose will do you follow? Why is it that Christians should read the Old Testament? Why should we be studying what's going to happen to Israel? Folks, you only get a limited picture of who God is in the New Testament. He's the same God. He's got the same power in the New Testament that he had in the Old. He's the King of Kings, the God of gods, the Lord of lords. Listen, we have seen the things that God has done. We've seen how all-knowing our God is. He knows what we do every day. I ask you, do you wake up in the morning and say, "Hello, God. Thank you for letting me be on the green side of grass today. Let's see what we're going to do. What's your plan for today?" Or do you say, "I'm going to do my will. I don't care what you want"? Most people don't even think about God. Don't think about his plans. God is all-knowing. God sees what we do. God sees it from before the foundation of the world, actually. You know, the Abrahamic covenant was for Israel. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 2 says, this is God talking to Abraham. "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." He's going to make the name of Abraham great. That name is Israel. He's going to make Israel a blessing. And he's not through with Israel. They didn't do so well previously, but he's not through with them. We've read in some of our previous studies about what he's going to do with Israel during the period of the 7 years that are still determined to come upon them. That's the Abrahamic covenant. God promised a new covenant. He promised it in the Old Testament, promised it through his prophets. That's for you. Oh, Israel will be included, but it's for you. We read something about that in the New Testament in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. It says, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people." They say that about me. "And a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." Folks, that's to you and to me. That's to the Gentiles. That's to the church. We've got basically the same job that Israel had. We're to be showing the world what a great God our God is. That's our job. Now, under the new covenant, God is still the same God that He was under the old covenant. Under the old covenant, we see that God declares in Leviticus 11:45 says, "I am holy." In 1 Peter 1:16, He says, "I am holy." He wants us to be showing Him to the world, to show Him we need to be living holy lives. Now, I don't want to make this lesson a lesson that has to do with being legalistic, but we need for our lives to show God to the world. We need to love our God to be able to do that. And it starts with us confessing Jesus as Lord. Lord means ruler. He says that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. This is the start. We are to get into God's book from here and learn more about our God. We're to see all of these things that we see in chapter 11, all of these things, we're to know that our God knows what's going on. We are a special people to God, just like Israel was a special people to God. They're going to demonstrate God to the world during that 7 years. We need to be demonstrating God to the world right now. And again, it starts by us knowing that we're saved, and then growing. And we grow by studying His Word.